With that focus on Joe, the customer, and then everybody's opinion very focused on what's important to Joe, it was able to let us distill down, with the input of everyone, what was that value proposition so that we can develop a dialogue when we go message.
When you think about marketing, it's so complex. You got to get the right platform, you got to get the right team, the right media buys, the right technology in place. And why are you doing all of that? Because you're trying to communicate the right value proposition to the right customer. But getting that right value proposition is no easy task. One way to do it is with a value proposition workshop. And we've got a unique interview today to help you do that. We're at MECLABS Institute's headquarters in Jacksonville, Florida, the parent research organization of Marketing Sherpa. And we just held a value prop workshop with an interesting technology startup. Joining me today are two executives from that startup to help give you a sense of what they learned and what you can do with your own value proposition workshop. So please join me in welcoming Billy Meadow and Scott Fletcher. So let's start up, Scott. What is LocatorX?
LocatorX is a startup based in Jacksonville, Florida, and we have a nanotechnology product, or it's a miniaturized atomic clock that will be a fundamental component of the Internet of Things.
Okay, and to give the audience your viewpoint, what's your role in the company?
My role is I'm the president and CEO of LocatorX, so I'm responsible for the operations and the strategy of the organization going forward.
Okay, what about you, Billy? What's your role?
Yeah, Dan, I'm the founder and chairman of LocatorX, and I found this amazing invention at the University of Oxford, and we're bringing it to market and commercialize it into a technology that will enable a lot of tracking of assets.
Okay, great. So essentially we have the business guy, the tech guy, and at a high level, the two executives, which is great in a value prop workshop to have those different viewpoints to hash everything out. But before we get into what actually happened in the workshop, what challenges were you having in the company?
Yeah. So, well, I've known Billy for over a decade. We've had a long friendship and business partnership. Billy is a serial entrepreneur, if you want, and I am a over 30 years industry veteran of working with startups and taking them to large-scale operational technology companies. And I came in just actually 2 months ago. So I'd been a original angel investor, but I joined 2 months ago. So I was very familiar with the product, what was going on with the operations. But one of the challenges I saw was that we didn't have a succinct message around what our value proposition was. And that's why I focused on this initial initiative coming on as the CEO of LocatorX.
Okay, and why is it a challenge for a startup? Like, you mentioned it's like your baby and it's hard to see, right?
Yeah, and of course you've got a lot of passion in early stage companies. If you didn't have that passion, you wouldn't make the type of commitments that are required to drive a startup forward. And I would say, like with your children, oftentimes you have a little bit of a blind side to challenges or issues that they might have. Everybody's child is sort of perfect, if you want. So we have a tremendous passion for the product that we have. But when you distill that down to what truly resonates with a prospective customer or even a prospective investor, you need to be very succinct with that. So that's why we engaged MECLABS to develop a value proposition so we could get the clear message out in the marketplace in terms of truly what is the product that we're bringing out to market.
Yeah, that so-called elevator pitch, right? So obviously this is going to be for landing pages, this is going to be for marketing, but give us a sense, like, what are the type of conversations that you guys have now where this would be helpful? I think you're flying around the country talking to investors, potential investors, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And elevator pitch, I think, is concise in terms of we have very influential people, key executives that we're coming across at various events and programs we're in. And that first 2-minute pitch is critical. Because it's first impression, they make decisions very quickly, and if you need to explain 30 minutes of what drives the nanotechnology, the miniaturization of the atomic clock, and the applications of what that means in the marketplace, you'll lose their interest very quickly. So that's why we engaged in a program to get that distilled down so we had the proper message and also the proper focus within our organization, because I'd say that does set some of the alignment of resources and investments going forward, so we're not focusing potentially in the wrong area, if you want.
Okay, so let's start into some of the things we went over in that workshop. It was great I had a chance to be there with you guys. So one thing is we start with that value proposition question. An important element of that question is asking about a specific customer. So it's hard when we're talking about that high primary level value proposition for you guys. Like, how many different industries could you possibly serve, Billy?
Well, I think the nature of this invention, this atomic clock, enables location tracking indoors and outside. So it's a technology that will impact virtually every industry, and I think that's one of the challenges. It's unique, it's nanotech, and we're bringing it to market. So we actually have talked to different industry leaders in a variety of industries, and that's been a challenge, is how to have a message oriented to their business that catches their attention.
And then it's not just the industries, but it's that right person in the company. So where did you try to narrow down there to in a company?
Right, and so there's an initial interest by a chief marketing officer. You have a chief operating officer. So there's various audiences or individuals where there's a message that needs to be tailored for them. I would say, following up on what Billy was saying, that in the supply chain side, that is where there's the most compelling initial value proposition or interest, in terms of when you're able to take a device, which would be the Internet of Things, it's miniaturized and it can go on anything and track it anywhere. It addresses those concerns that businesses and individuals have in the supply chain in terms of theft and counterfeiting, goods that you can't track, all of those type of things that have always been an issue, but there's never been a solution with the capabilities that we're bringing to market.
Okay, and the important thing about talking about the customer that might be facing some of those challenges, we're going to get to this in a minute, because when we talk about some of the things like the competitors or the features, we can really come back to that customer we first talked about and see if it matters to them. But before we get there, I want to say, here's another challenge I think in a complex company or a startup like yours is there's not a set place where you are yet. And what I mean by that is you guys have 3 phases of how you're going to market, right? So you want to just give us a high level of those phases and how you decided where to focus the value proposition workshop?
Sure, absolutely. Billy, did you want to?
Sure. So we have the phases are we've been building a lot of software to enable the back-end tracking of assets, because we knew when we complete this chip with the atomic clock inside, we want to have that chip that's going to be packaged like into a label that may be on a product. So there's a lot of software development of saying, well, how can you track billions of products? So that's the phase 1 launch that we're doing. Then phase 2 is building it where our chip will have basic Bluetooth capabilities, so anyone with a smartphone can talk to the chip that may be in a label to get the history of where that product's moved. And then the third phase is the actual high volume delivery of the atomic clock. So we're doing these in stepwise function to bring it to market.
Okay, so that's interesting. So a more established company with the primary value proposition, their challenge might be like the one you mentioned. We've got so many industries, so many products, but a startup, you got to decide, well, where are we even looking in the life of the startup? So how did you decide where to focus?
Yeah, so we looked at a logical rollout where we could start showing our execution capabilities. So it's about a 1-year period from the start of the the design and chip manufacturing before we bring the atomic clock out into the marketplace. So what we had realized was that we could start working on some foundational components, as Billy was saying, in terms of the database, the security protocols, the software tools around that, the marketing programs, the development efforts, those type of things for our first phase product. And what we were surprised by was the reception in the marketplace just for the first phase product that doesn't have that chip actually built into it. So it just validated the market opportunity that we've seen. And we're engaged currently with Fortune 100 companies that want to bring this in, because the pain point is so high when you look at things that you can't track accurately, and specifically when you're out in the supply chain where you don't have control over your asset in terms of where that's at. So there's interest on the commercial side, and then the government applications are enormous in terms of the Department of Defense and other government entities that see this as a disruptive technology that could be a real game changer in the industries that these entities are focused in.
And so that shows a wide scope of the possibilities.
Yeah.
But to nail down and narrow down that value proposition, one thing that we have to determine is what are the different choices that the customer has. So we determine who the choices are, what the products we want to talk about. Next, it's time to talk about the competition. So like you mentioned, when you're in a startup, when people are really motivated and excited, it's very easy to say like, we've got no competition. It's only our product. And I noticed, and not to pick, there was a bit of a struggle in that room too, right? You guys kept trying to sell us on, no, but it does this, it does that. So what did we help pull out of you in terms of finding a competition for
and I think that was an absolute struggling part for us. Part of that is, I would say, any startup would have a high level of passion, so they feel as if they don't really have that strong of competition. So that's an inevitable hurdle. The application that we have here definitely causes some challenges, and your team enabled us to work through that. And I would make the comparison to, it's almost as if when you're looking at transportation, just transportation in general, and you look at the different forms of transportation. So you have bicycle versus a Lamborghini. And what you have is that's sort of the dynamic that we have in place when you look at the feature set that we have, and we can certainly elaborate on that, but the power source, the size, the miniaturization, the price points that we'll have, there's no true competition. It's almost with a form of transportation that would be a high-speed sports car that costs the same price or less than a bicycle. You're like, how do I compare these two? So that's the challenge. But of course, you can't let that cloud your development of the value prop, because otherwise you won't have the right focus. So that was one of the big benefits that came out of that, was it let us focus on really the perception of that potential buyer and what we needed to be focused on so that we'd get the most impactful message about what we're bringing to market.
Okay, and then so what we did next is we came up with different possible value claims that might impact that buyer. So before we get to what some of those value claims were that we decided on, let me ask each of you individually. This is the important thing of having a team together. Billy, what was the top value claim? What do you think is the most important value claim?
I think the value claim is that you could have indoor tracking virtually anywhere using existing cell towers. So where there's been other tracking technologies that have been out there that typically have to have beacons, ours can work anywhere practically on the planet.
And Scott,
indoors.
Scott, what do you think the most important value claim was?
Right, and I felt that the ROI was the most compelling part, and that was what came out in the exercise. Was Billy was a little bit more focused on one piece. Another member looked at it and said, no, it's the fact that it's a disruptive technology and what it's going to go through. And the exercise, the methodology that you had, let us really, as a group, agree upon how to prioritize that, how to assign value to that, and then get us more focused so we weren't just chasing down ROI because the person in the room was most passionate about that and everybody else. It was a very disciplined, structured exercise that we went through. And I've worked in a number of companies building this out, and this was, I would say, the most impactful and well-structured methodology that I've come across for building out a value prop.
And I think that's a great example where you can have having those right voices in the room, because I've definitely been in value proposition workshops where you ask, what's the most important thing? And the person that leads the department that does this thinks it's this, but then the person that leads the department that does something else says it's that. So something we like to joke sometimes is the value proposition workshop, it's almost like company therapy. It's like family therapy for companies, because you get to hash everything else out there. Yeah. There's someone else out there talking about it. So did you find, I know you guys are pretty aligned, but did you find maybe going in with different viewpoints but coming out a little more aligned?
Yeah, and I would say that I sort of struggle with referring to it as therapy because it seems as if you've got a problem. But I would view it as a team building exercise. So I felt that we came in as a very cohesive team, and we came out with a lot more clarity on the direction that we were going in, because it's inevitable. If you are really passionate, if one person's passionate about the ROI piece and another person thinks it's disruptive, it's like, well, I listened to your ROI piece a bit, but I still think, mine is up here. When we went through there and we weighed that, everybody walked out with the same vision of, these are the key value components in here, and we need to work that into a succinct message. So that was the takeaway.
Because we went through, we ranked everything, gave it an order on the appeal and the exclusivity for each factor, right?
Right. And anytime there was a little bit of we weren't in full agreement, we always went back and said, all right, well, this is Joe customer, and this is what they're looking for. What's their real perspective? So Scott, not your perspective, but Joe's perspective. And I think also what it did was it had Billy articulate more components that he might have had exclusively in his background because of the role he has of being more close into the technology. And then we had our sales leader in there, and he's got more experience from currently field updates of what's going on there, so it shapes that a little bit. And then we brought that whole mix back together and then put it against what Joe's looking for in the pitch. It brought together a consolidated, prioritized list of the components that should be integral in the value prop.
I think that's the upside of starting with the customer, or even jokingly name the customer, to make sure, obviously we don't have the customer at the table yet, but just to give them a seat at the table in some way.
Right. And the thing is, and Billy and I are the leaders in the company. Billy's been with us from the very beginning since LocatorX got the exclusive rights to the patent. But everybody learned, so certainly, I learned a lot more from some things Billy brought in there, but the different perspectives all brought together. And it was a learning experience too for people in terms of getting more of the various value components that all layer up into what we're bringing to market.
Yeah, I think the thing that I heard too was where you talked about all the areas of appeal and exclusive aspects of your innovation with that focus on Joe, the customer, and then everybody's opinion very focused on what's important to Joe. It was able to let us distill down with the input of everyone what was that value proposition, so that we can develop a dialogue when we go message, because that's the challenge when you have a foundational technology that can do a lot of different things for a lot of different people. By focusing on just a good generic ideal customer, that really helps immensely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that helps is bringing Joe to the room is having some skeptical voices, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So again, it's great when you're in that startup mode, and really any company can get into that groupthink mentality of it's almost a team. You're a team when you're going against the competition. Yeah. But I think one thing I saw where the skeptical mentality came up is in the top value claim you were talking about, where I remember at first you were talking about, okay, it can be tracked anywhere. Mm-hmm. And kind of when you start asking a little more questions like, well, wait a minute, I can, Delta can track anywhere, you scan everything. And I think you really helped put the sharp tip on the point of what we meant by tracking anywhere. You want to explain that a little more?
Oh, sure. I think the thing is, from a technology platform, every technology has its pros and cons. This one's particularly unique because it solves a fundamental problem in my mind that is going to open up a lot. And when I say in my mind, it's where cell towers are today. So anywhere you have a cell tower, you can get a reference signal for location with an atomic clock, and it solved the problem of why GPS doesn't work indoors. But it's not everywhere, because obviously cell phones aren't everywhere. And so there's certain places you won't be able to track, but by and large, it's nearly everywhere. And so it's important to have those kind of clarifications when you're promoting a technology, so you don't overpromise what you're bringing to the market.
Absolutely, and I think you mentioned too, because we were talking about like even Delta tracking luggage, that the difference is you don't have to scan each different thing; it's updating automatically.
Right.
Yeah, and I think let me just chime in on something. What's interesting is that there are so many of these situations in place that are easy to come up with. So there's the Delta tracking of your baggage, and then you look at what a warehouse will put in place with existing technologies to solve a business problem, and they're big business problems. Certainly, for any traveler, a lost bag it's a big problem. What we're in a situation with, there's a convergence of technologies today that we're building upon, and the key component is that atomic clock that was invented at Oxford University. And that's why the story is so well received when people look at what we can do in terms of the capability, the miniaturization, the fact that it goes into really an existing infrastructure as opposed to having to put in special receivers or any type of technology. So this is driven off of cell phone towers that are in place, or relay stations, so you have that it's almost ubiquitous. Or when you look at it in terms of world gross domestic product, over 99% of the world gross domestic product has cell phone coverage attached to it because of the dynamics.
And I think that's where kind of the debate inside the value proposition workshop helps to go from the generic to the specific. Because first you hear something, you're like, well, wait a minute, can't this do that, can't that do that? And then you narrow it, it's like, well, wait a minute, why is it different? Oh, because it's this, and it's this. And then you get those specific statements down.
Right.
I think helps. I think one element that really came up, Billy, that you brought up was when we got to the credibility. Right? So we talk about the credibility and the exclusivity of the product.
Right.
Like, well, the ultimate exclusivity is a patent, right? Any product with a patent. And you, I think, great having that technical expertise, you explained, well, wait a minute, there's even more exclusivity here because it's not just a regular patent. You want to explain how it works?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, we got a patent that was issued by Oxford. We licensed it from Oxford, and so they're a partner with us, so to speak, in the business. And that particular patent is based on a man-made molecule. Okay, this thing called a buckyball that's inside that creates the atomic clock. And so with that, I looked at it and said, it's got the same strength of a patent as a pharmaceutical drug patent, so I call it a pharmaceutical grade patent. And so even though you have a patent, it's important to always look at the business process around that patent. So we also filed additional patents for the business processes of using an atomic clock. And part of that is how you communicate that we actually have a growing patent portfolio that can be for different markets. And I think from a value proposition point of view, it'll be important as we build out the business to tailor those messages into each market individually. But in the beginning, just setting out that we have a foundation, it's important to communicate. We've got something that we can convey to our business partners as the value proposition, that we can license it to them.
Right, and you mentioned, because I think a business process patent is harder to defend than a molecular patent.
That's much harder to defend. And so our core business is based on this man-made molecule and basically a molecular patent. That will be able to convey rights to different markets to those different companies to match their value that they see. So distilling that down is an important aspect of the value proposition, that we will be licensing the patent rights to different industries.
Yeah, I think that was another great example where I saw a little light bulb go off in the room. Because when you get the right value proposition right, it's not just for the customer, it's for internally, so the whole company understands. It's for all your vendor ecosystem, your agencies, your partners, your production partners who you're working with. So to explain that, we could just talk about a patent generically, but to have you explain and be able to really nail down, well, this is why this is an even better patent than just a generic patent. I think that's another helpful moment.
Yep.
So let's look at a high level. Where do you guys land? I know, we're talking to you, it's pretty fresh after it. We're still in the process of compiling these things. There's going to be experimentation. Where do you feel like you landed at the primary value prop for LocatorX? What would you say, Scott?
Yep. I would say the tracking anything, we had 5 that bubbled up, 4 or 5 that bubbled up to the top, but the tracking anything, anywhere was the one that got the highest ratings.
Mm-hmm. And so then we didn't only do the primary level value proposition, we also did a specific prospect level value proposition. So what prospect were you focusing on in that case?
Yeah, so we also looked at because we're a startup, and we looked at what a potential investor would be looking at too for the opportunity or for LocatorX, yes.
Okay, where did you land there on what bubbled up?
Yeah, so what bubbled up there was disruptive technology was one of the top ones. Also, radical return on your investment was another one that came up to the top, and then a patent protected technology.
And then the final one I'd say is just that because it's a patented technology that we can convey rights to different verticals, we have a lot of choices of different channel partners to take it to. So from an investor's point of view, there's different industries that we'll be able to, we don't know, the market will tell us which one are the best industries. We know there's some really good ones to go after, but the market will tell. And so from an investor's point of view, we've got a foundation that can go to a lot of places.
Right. Yeah, and we defined it as the TAM is the acronym that's used for total addressable market. So the applications are enormous for this, and what we're doing is phasing that in. How we'll be rolling it out in different markets.
Great. Well, I think the complexity involved in a product like that really helps, and you narrow down. So you said, okay, we've got this value proposition for this group, the supply chain executives. Now the investors, it's another group we need a value proposition for. And as I'm sure you grow, you'll have other value propositions you need to figure out.
Yeah.
What surprised you most from the process, Bill? You've been working with LocatorX for a bit.
Well, I think the biggest thing is just the process that we went through. I'm an entrepreneur. I've built up several different technology companies, but I'd never been through a process that said, really distill this down so you have clarity of message. It's been somewhat ad hoc, and I've found it to be very valuable. Just going through the process of seeing all the different viewpoints and the how should I say, the formula of your business model to drive us to come up and clarify our own message, which has been pretty enlightening.
What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I would say that the thing that I was most impressed with was I viewed when we went into this that MECLABS would facilitate it. You know, it's your expertise to facilitate this process, and you would bring not just the expertise of developing a value prop, but that you'd have some knowledge about what we were doing. And I would say my expectations for the knowledge that the team brought were vastly exceeded. I really felt like it was one group in there together. So the domain expertise about chip technology and the Internet of Things and nanotechnology, the team is a smart team that we were working with, but they'd done a lot of homework coming in that. So we were moving at a very fast pace and walking through acronyms or certain types of concepts, and we just didn't miss a beat. Instead of saying, well, time out for a second, I need to understand this supply chain term or this chip production term. So that to me was just the biggest takeaway, was the way that the team worked together, what MECLABS brought to the process.
And I'd like to sort of also say I was kind of surprised the level of research that you did on the industry and what our business was before you came in to talk to us. That you had done a lot of legwork on your own about us, or about the industry and places it could go. So, you know, you were up to speed pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good thing I should mention at the beginning. The value proposition workshop doesn't start boom out of nowhere. It's important to get that the company's the internal viewpoint, but also the external research, looking at who potential competitors are, where is the market going, what are different segments. So it sounds like that really helped inform the discussion.
Yeah, and I know when we first started out and we were getting more interaction, and I said, oh, well, these guys are sort of keeping us honest so that we're not just pontificating on all these things, we're real passionate about it. And then it was more of like not just guiding us and facilitating the process, but I really felt like you were like in certain areas contributing as much or more of some of us, because we would drive with the topic and you would really work through that.
Okay, great. And so let me ask you lastly, what advice would you give to other business leaders? So let me ask you on two levels, right? First, because I know, Scott, you've worked for some bigger companies. Yeah. What advice first would you give to just a business leader of any enterprise company about going through something like this?
Yeah, I would say that with any company, but in particular when you're a startup, you should really set the bar high for operational expertise. And I think of that as operational expertise when it comes to marketing or sales, any of those type of things. And through either people that you bring onto your team or third parties that you engage. So we actually don't have a full-time dedicated marketing resource. What we did was we went out in the marketplace and we said, we want to find the best marketing partner to help us through these programs so that a small company down here in Jacksonville really has more of a marketing presence that you would expect from a much larger company, and didn't want to have it seen that, oh, well, I see the evolution, the first press release was sort of a work in progress, and what the company did and the value prop was a little weak. I wanted to come out to market firing on all cylinders, if you want. So I viewed marketing as a key component, but if we walk through and we talk in more detail about what we're doing with our core technology, that core technology, you would think that that's coming out of a major technology company today. Or if you look at the sales programs that we're putting in place, we've got the talent and the discipline that's more in line with the company that knows how to sell. So just have a very high bar for what we're doing in the marketplace. And I think people have a experience with really disruptive technologies and disruptive companies that are coming into the marketplace. You look at I think Uber and Lyft are great examples where 10 years ago, people just weren't paying a lot of attention to that today, and now that's completely changed that industry around. Airbnb is another example. So you have resource asset light companies that can come in and totally disruptive technology, and I feel that disruption is a good thing. Sometimes it could be a little bit bad.
Creative disruption, right?
Yeah, creative disruption. And I feel that LocatorX will be seen as one of the key disruptive technologies coming into the marketplace going forward.
There's that passion coming through.
Yeah.
So start with that. But I think you mentioned something great in the beginning too there where, a lot of times with customers, you really only have that one chance to make a first impression, right? And so getting it right the first time you hit them, because the second time it comes around, it might be like, oh, I've heard of that company and it's not right for me.
Yeah.
And let me ask you, Billy, from a technical side. So I know a lot of innovators, more technical people, and you're better than a lot of people I've met in being able to communicate and distill things. But I know definitely some tech folks, it's difficult for them to get from the gorpy things to actually communicating. Okay, what value does this have for a customer, for a person, for an end user, for anyone in the business? So what advice would you give to tech folks about value propositions, a value proposition workshop? Now you've been through one.
I would definitely say as soon as you start the process and as an entrepreneur, when you're looking to raise capital to take this great idea and bring it to the market, going through a value proposition earlier is better because it distills the message and it forces you to look at how would an investor look at this from independent eyes. And certainly we've talked to different investors over the time, angel investors and the like, but having a process to go through on the appeal and the exclusivity aspects. Investors can put their money anywhere. And so clarifying your message to the value that you bring to your largest potential customers, and more importantly, the message that you deliver to the investor of how you're going to build the business to take care of those customers, I think it's important to do earlier rather than later.
So aside from the message, the early part is really important. Has this helped you get a sense of where you want to take the product, the roadmap, the features, any of that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yes. It was as I mentioned earlier, it was a powerful team building exercise. To stand alone, it was a powerful team building exercise for a team that was working really well together, made it was a more cohestive team.
And we didn't do any trust falls off of the conference table, right?
Yeah. We didn't have to. We didn't have to do any of those creative type of things, but also it expanded our sort of perspective on how we need to define the rollout, the product of all throughout our operations are impacted by the value prop that's coming out. So it was a very powerful tool that will impact our business.
Well, that's great. I mean, at the end of the day, a value proposition is a proposition to deliver value to the customer. So getting the messaging right about that is important, but also getting that end value that they receive.
Right,
so that's excellent.
right. And we are in the middle of the process, and we are fine-tuning that value prop. And I look forward to when you hear our value prop that's finalized shortly.
I hope we can learn more from you as we go too. So, well, thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for watching. You can see many more case studies at marketingsherpa.com.